If you asked me what peace smells like, I'd tell you it smells like old paper dust and dark roast coffee beans. That was the smell of the Scribe's Nook, my little bookstore on South Congress, here in Austin. That Tuesday morning, everything was quiet. The sun was filtering through the old front window, lighting up the worn pine floors, and the only thing on my mind was whether the new shipment of biographies would arrive before noon. I had just turned 65, and this shop wasn't just a business. It was the legacy my late husband, Arthur, had left me. I was dusting off a leather-bound copy of Hemingway when the bell on the door chimed, but it wasn't the friendly jingle I was used to. It was sharp, impatient, and then a different scent invaded the shop. Not paper. It was expensive perfume and ... Hurry, Chloe, my niece. She didn't walk in, she advanced. The sharp click of her heels on the hardwood was like a metronome set too fast. 30 years old, brilliant, and a VP at some venture capital fund I could never remember the name of. Aunt Elle, she said, without even looking up from her tablet. I finished reviewing your balance sheets. I set the book down, managing a small smile. Hello, Chloe. Nice to see you too. Would you like a coffee? No time, she dismissed. Like I said, the sheets are bad, just as bad as I thought. She swiped the screen. This shop is no longer a legacy. It's a financial liability. You're negative 18% on cash flow last quarter. I tightened my grip on the dust rag. Chloe, this is a community bookstore. It DOES and single quotes T. It's an underperforming asset, she cut in, her voice cold as steel. And my fund has agreed to finance a restructuring. I presented my plan. They loved it. My heart skipped. Restructuring. What does that mean? Chloe finally looked up, a smile so thin it could cut glass. We're pivoting the space into an automated VR book experience. Fully automated. No staff, no dust, no dead inventory. Customers pay by the hour to experience classic novels instead of owning them. It's the future, Aunt Elle. I felt the air leave my lungs. VR, automated, Chloe. Are you talking about getting rid of the books? I'm talking about saving the core value of this asset, she said, her patience clearly gone. I've already signed the preliminary contracts with the tech vendors. Their team will be here on the 1st of next month to begin the 3D scanning and clearing. The demolition, she said, flatly. We need an open plan space for the VR pods. I've handled everything. I stared at her. She was standing in the middle of Arthur's 40-year legacy, in the middle of the stories that had saved my soul, and calling it an open plan space. This, I said, my voice shaking, this is my home. This was Arthur's life. Chloe sighed, a put-upon, pitying sound, the kind you use on a stubborn child. Aunt Elle, don't be emotional. This is business. And frankly, you're sitting on a goldmine of real estate in this part of town. You can't just sell old paper forever. She walked over and patted my shoulder, a gesture of pure condescension. The contracts are signed. My investors are excited. You'll thank me when you see the quarterly returns. And with that, she turned and clicked her way out the door, leaving me standing frozen in the room. The bell jingled again, but this time it sounded like a funeral toll. I stood there for a long time. Her perfume still hung in the air, artificial and suffocating, trying to choke out the smell of old paper. The first, she had said. Today was the 15th. I had 2 weeks. I looked around my shop. The books themselves seemed to be holding their breath. Not this time, Chloe, I whispered to an old portrait of Arthur hanging behind the counter. Not his legacy. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in my small apartment above the shop, listening to the sound of Austin rain tapping against the tin roof. The only sound at 3 a.m. You'll thank me later. The words echoed in my head, the same words she used 5 years ago. When Arthur passed, I was shattered. Chloe, fresh out of business school, flew in to handle things. I thought it was kindness. It was ... optimization. I remember sitting there, numb with grief, as Chloe sat across from me with a laptop. Aunt Elle, she'd said, her voice flat. I've run a cost-benefit analysis on the funeral service options. Cremation package B3 is the most financially efficient. It saves 42% over a traditional burial. I hadn't been able to speak, I just nodded. Then, a week after the funeral, while I was still trying to remember how to breathe, she optimized Arthur's prized stamp collection. It was just sitting in a closet. Aunt Elle, a non-liquid asset. I found a buyer online. The funds had been transferred. She sold the one thing Arthur had spent his entire life curating, before I even had a chance to miss it. She did it in the name of efficiency, and I, in my fog of grief, had let her. I'd told myself she was just showing love in the only way she knew how, that she didn't know how to process emotion. But sitting there in the dark, I finally understood. Chloe didn't process emotion. She saw it as an annoying variable in her spreadsheet. And the scribe's nook was the last variable. I got up and walked over to Arthur's personal bookshelf. It wasn't just books, it was my spine. It was the proof that he had existed. She believes in data, I said to the empty room. But she forgot about people. She forgot about Arthur's old lawyer, David. David Coates, the silver fox of Austin probate law. Arthur and David had seen each other through 2 of David's divorces and 1 of Arthur's near bankruptcies. They weren't just friends, they were allies. And I remembered, clear as day, Arthur signing his will at my kitchen table. He had chuckled. David, he'd said, we have to make sure Eleanor is protected, not just from creditors, but from good ideas. I never understood what that meant. Not until tonight. I picked up the phone. My hand wasn't shaking. The grief from 5 years ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The phone rang twice. David Coates, speaking. His voice was still gravelly, like old whiskey. David, I said. It's Eleanor. Eleanor Reed. There was a pause. Ellie, he said, his voice warming. My God, it's been too long. Is everything all right, dear? Not exactly, David, I said, looking out the window at the gray dawn trying to break. I need your help. Chloe is optimizing my life again. This time, she's after the bookstore. David let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't a sound of fatigue. It was the sound of an old warrior putting on his armor. I see, he said. She found the VC contracts. But I bet she didn't read all of Arthur's will, did she? I don't think she reads anything that doesn't have a pie chart, I replied. Good, David said. Meet me at my office. 9 a.m. and bring your shop manager Marcus's employment file. Chloe thinks this is a negotiation. She doesn't know that in Austin, the oldest wills have the sharpest teeth. We're going to fight her with paper. When I hung up, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. The smell of coffee was starting to drift up from the kitchen. Chloe had her investors and her algorithms, but I had David, and I had a promise. David's office was tucked away in an old brick building, the kind where the floors creaked and the air smelled of decayed old case files. It was the exact opposite of Chloe's world of glass and steel. David, with his white hair and thick glasses, pushed a yellowed, heavy document across his desk toward me. Here it is, he said. Arthur's will, specifically. Legacy clause for B. He cleared his throat and read. The ownership of the scribe's nook, including the building and the business, shall belong to Eleanor Reed, provided the core business defined as the sale and trade of physical paper books is maintained. He paused, looking at me over his glasses. And here's the beautiful part, Ellie. If, at any time, the core business purpose is altered, ownership shall immediately and irrevocably pass to the longest-serving employee at that time, on the sole condition that said employee commits to maintaining the paperbook legacy. I was stunned. The longest-serving employee? You mean, Marcus. David nodded, a sly, foxy grin spreading across his face. Marcus, your manager. He's been there 12 years. Arthur adored him. My God, I whispered. Arthur. He saw this coming. Arthur didn't trust the future, David said. He trusted people. Chloe's plan for a VR space is a very clear alteration of the core business purpose. All we have to do is let her pull the trigger. But David, I asked, how can we be sure Marcus will? That's why you brought his file, David said. We need to talk to Marcus, not as his boss. As co-inheritors of Arthur's legacy. I went back to the shop around noon. The air was thick with tension. Marcus, my 35-year-old manager, was at the front desk, staring grimly at the computer. He was a poet at heart, trapped in the body of a man who was too good with spreadsheets. He was loyal, but he was also a worrier. Marcus, I started, trying to keep my voice even. I saw Chloe's email. He cut me off, his voice tired. She sent it to me, to the business plan, the projections. He swiveled in his chair to look at me, his eyes full of conflict. Eleanor, I hate to say this, but her numbers make sense. We're sinking. We've been sinking for 18 months. My stomach dropped. This was not what I expected. Eleanor, he continued, lowering his voice. I love this place. God knows I do, but VR. I mean, it's the future. Maybe Chloe's offer isn't so bad. At least we'd still have jobs. She said she'd keep me on as experience manager. I stared at him. The man who had once wept when we acquired a first edition, Leaves of Grass. Experience manager. Just don't do anything rash, Eleanor, he said, looking away from me. Don't fight her, just out of pride. Just, think about it, okay. He turned back to his screen. I stood there, a cold dread washing over me. Did he really mean that? Or had Chloe gotten to him, with her numbers and a fancy new title? David said Arthur trusted him. But it looked like Marcus trusted Chloe's spreadsheets more. I was in my office, trying to call David about Marcus, when the front bell chimed again. This time, it was a man I'd seen lurking around the block all week. He wore an expensive silk suit, too shiny for South Congress. He stuck out his hand, his smile slick. Mrs. Reed. Vance Properties. I'm a developer. I'm not selling, I said immediately, walking to the counter. Oh, I know, he chuckled. I know you've got an internal offer, from your TechWiz niece, right? Very impressive. I froze. How did you know that? Austin's a small town when it comes to real estate, Mrs. Reed. I heard she's reimagining the space. Smart girl, but I've got a better idea. He pulled out a card. Why work so hard? I'll buy you out. Cash, right now. I'll pay double the market rate for this lot. You sign, and you can be retired in the Bahamas by tomorrow. Think about it. No VR, no niece. I looked at him. Double the market rate. I'm looking to build a complex. He shrugged. Your niece has the right idea, but the wrong scale. This place needs to be leveled. The circle was tightening. First Chloe with her tech, now Vance with his bulldozers. Were they connected? Did Chloe send him to scare me, to make her VR offer seem like the gentler option? Mr. Vance, I said, my voice iced. This isn't a lot. This is a bookstore. And it is not for sale. His smile vanished. Is that so? A shame. Well, if you change your mind, or if your smart little niece wants to partner up, give me a call. My offer is on the table. He turned and left. I watched him go, feeling like I was caught in a vice. One side wanted to digitize my legacy, the other wanted to demolish it. 2 days later, the trouble arrived in a new, polite form. The bell chimed, and Chloe walked in, not alone this time. She was followed by 2 men in identical black shirts, holding tablets and devices that looked like laser guns. Aunt Elle, she chirped, her voice sickeningly sweet. I want you to meet the design team. This is Ken and James, from Future. They're just here to take some measurements and 3D scan the space so we can start building the models. Ken and James nodded at me blank-faced, and immediately started aiming red laser beams at my bookshelves. Look, Chloe said, holding out her tablet. Here's the mock-up. See? We're keeping the vibe of the exposed brick. Very Austin. Just updating the user interface. I looked at the image. It was a sterile white room with plastic chairs that looked like they were from a science fiction movie. I took a deep breath. Chloe. Yes, Auntie, she said, still tapping at her screen. Did you ever ask me, I said slowly, if I wanted this? Chloe blinked. Her smile faltered for just a second. We're past want, Aunt Elle. This is need. The business needs this to survive. This business, I said, my voice hardening, is mine, and I don't want these men in here. I don't want them scanning my books. A heavy silence fell. Ken and James stopped, lowered their devices, and looked awkwardly at Chloe. Chloe's face flushed. The sweetness evaporated, revealing the raw irritation beneath. Aunt Elle, don't do this. Don't embarrass me in front of my partners. They're on the clock. Then you're wasting their money, I said. Tell them to leave, now. I looked her straight in the eye. This was not the soft-spoken aunt she was used to. This was the woman who had kept this shop alive, by herself, for 5 years. Chloe ground her teeth. You too, she hissed at the designers. Wait for me outside. The men scrambled out. The moment the bell chimed, Chloe turned back to me, her eyes blazing. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not going to work. I have contracts, I have investors, and I have the title, I said. We'll see about that, she whispered. I'll be back, on the 1st. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She stormed out the door. I leaned against the counter, shaking. The first battle was won, but I knew it was just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and sent a short email to David. David, Phase 1. The design team came. I sent them away. The mask has cracked. A minute later, his reply came. Good. Now, brace for the storm. The storm hit at 9 p.m. that night. I was locking up when the front door was thrown open so hard it slammed against the wall. The bell cried out. Chloe, she wasn't the polished professional anymore. Her hair was messy, her face was blotchy and red. What was that? She screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet space. What did you say to the design team? They quit. They said you were hostile. I calmly put the register key in my pocket. I told them they weren't welcome. Not welcome. She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. You embarrassed me. I have investors. I have timelines. You can't just change your mind. I didn't change my mind, Chloe, I said, my voice steady. You made a decision for me. I'm simply correcting it. She stopped pacing and whipped around. Correcting it. You're sabotaging it. You're acting like a child. You're being selfish. Selfish, yes. You'd rather let this place crumble into dust than accept the future. You're just an old woman who's scared of technology. Why is my peace, I asked softly, so terrifying to you, Chloe? She froze. I stepped closer. You think because I'm old, I don't understand. But I understand perfectly. You don't want to save this place. You want to conquer it. You want to gut its soul and turn it into another line item in your portfolio to impress your bosses. The Scribe's Nook brand has value. You're right, but that value comes from the books, from Arthur, not from your VR machines. You've mistaken my kindness for incompetence. She stared at me, her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer. For the first time in her life, Chloe had no data to back her up. Finally, she found her voice, but now it was a cold, low threat. Fine, she said. You want to do this the hard way. The first. 10 a.m., the construction crew will be here. My investors will be here. The contracts are signed. I will be taking possession. You're talking about destroying my property, I said. No, she smirked. I'm calling it a hostile takeover. You can't stop progress, Aunt Elle. She spun around and slammed the door so hard a book fell off a nearby shelf. I stood in the rattling silence. My heart was pounding, but it was pounding steady. I picked up the fallen book. 9 a.m., I whispered to Arthur's portrait. I picked up my phone and called David. David, I said. The moment he answered, she just left. She's declared war, she said. The first, 10 a.m., construction crew. David chuckled, a dry, papery sound. Good. Tell Marcus, 9 a.m., on the first, he needs to wear his best suit. Playtime is over. Chloe just declared war. But she brought a spreadsheet to a story fight. And in this place, the stories always win. The morning of the first of the month dawned cold and gray. A typical Texas norther had blown in, stripping the trees of their last leaves. I was up before sunrise. I came downstairs and brewed coffee in the shop's old machine, the one Arthur had bought in 1983. The room smelled of peace, but it was a different kind of peace now. It wasn't the quiet of sanctuary. It was the calm of a battlefield before the first shot. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I usually saved for holidays. I pinned my hair back. I was not going to face the end of my world in an apron. At 8:45 a.m., the bell chimed. It was David, my lawyer. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a single, beautiful, leather-bound folder. Are you ready, Ellie? He asked, his voice soft. I am, I said. But ... what about Marcus? He's not here yet. What if ... what if he took Chloe's offer? David finished my sentence. What if he'd rather be an experienced manager than the owner of a failing bookstore? My heart faltered. The doubt I'd been suppressing all week rushed in. He ... he seemed convinced by her numbers. David. He was, David said. He was terrified. He's a poet, Ellie, not a fighter. He didn't just see Chloe's spreadsheets. He saw his own spreadsheets. He knew you were sinking. Then, we've lost, I whispered. No, David said, just as the bell chimed again. It was 9 a.m. Marcus walked in. He looked pale, but his eyes were clear, and just as David had instructed, he was wearing his best suit. Eleanor, he said, nodding to me. Mr. Coet's Marcus. I breathed, relief, washing over me so fast I felt dizzy. I apologize for the theatrics, Eleanor, Marcus said, straightening his tie. When Mr. Coates showed me the will 2 weeks ago, I didn't believe it. But when Chloe started talking about financial liability, I realized what Arthur was protecting you from. He wasn't protecting you from failure. He was protecting you from her. Her numbers were right, Eleanor, he continued. The shop is failing, but her solution was wrong. You don't burn down a library just because people aren't reading. So, what do? I asked. David stepped forward. We do nothing. We let the enemy charge. We let them walk right into the trap Arthur set for them 20 years ago. And so we waited. At 9:58 a.m., the rumbling started. A large construction truck, the kind with a hydraulic lift, pulled up, blocking the entire street. Behind it, a black sedan with tinted windows. At 10 a.m. sharp, the bell didn't jingle. The door was thrown open. Chloe entered. She was flanked by two men in expensive suits, her investors and the construction foreman, who was holding a clipboard, while Aunt Elle Chloe announced, her voice booming with false confidence. It's 10 o'clock. Time's up. The investors looked around the shop with barely disguised contempt. It's got good bones, one of them muttered, but it's filthy. The crew is ready to begin clearing, Chloe said, gesturing to the foreman. Last chance. You can walk out gracefully, or you can watch them pack up your dusty old books. I took a sip of my coffee. I looked at David. David smiled. Actually, Ms. Reed, David Coates said, stepping forward from behind a tall bookshelf. His voice was polite, but it cut through the room like a razor. Chloe froze. Who are you? David Coates. I was Arthur Reed's attorney, and I am the executor of his estate. This has nothing to do with you, Chloe snapped, sensing a problem. This is a business transition. My aunt's asset is ... is not her asset to give. David interrupted. Your timing, Ms. Reed, is perfect. You see, by arriving here today with the express stated intent to alter the core business, and I see the demolition crew is right outside, you have just triggered legacy clause for B of Arthur's last will and testament. One of the investors looked at Chloe. Clause what? Chloe, what is this? You told us the asset was secure. It is, Chloe insisted, her eyes darting between David and the investor. She's just an old woman. She's ... double quotes. She's the woman who just co-signed this, David said. He opened the leather folder and presented a document. Clause for B states that if the core business of selling paper books is threatened, ownership of this building and this company passes immediately to the longest-serving employee. Chloe laughed. A high-pitched, nervous sound. What? That's insane. That's not legal. It is 100% legal, David said. Arthur was very specific. He didn't trust good ideas. So, as of 10:02 a.m., this property no longer belongs to Eleanor. Chloe's face lit up with a sudden, predatory smile. See, I told you, she's unfit. It defaults to me, the next of kin. David just smiled. No, it doesn't. It passes to the longest-serving employee. He turned. Mr. Marcus, if you would. Marcus stepped forward from the history section. His suit was sharp. His voice was steady. Thank you, Mr. Coates, Marcus said. He looked directly at Chloe. The scribe's nook is now under new management. We will not be requiring your services, or your investors, or your demolition crew. Please leave. The color drained from Chloe's face. The investors stared at her, their faces turning thunderous. Chloe, one of them hissed. You told us you had this. You told us, she was a confused old lady. You didn't do your due diligence. No, ... wait, ... Chloe stammered, looking at me. You tricked me. You senile old ... This was my inheritance. This was my asset. That was when I finally spoke. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. You saw an asset, Chloe, I said, my voice quiet, but it carried. Arthur left a legacy. You can't liquidate a legacy. You just inherited that lesson. Now, as the new owner said, please leave. Chloe looked at me, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending rage. The investors were already on their phones, walking out the door, shouting about lawsuits. The foreman, seeing his paycheck disappear, just shrugged and motioned for his crew to pack up. Chloe stood there for one more second, vibrating with fury. Then she turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the bell finally, definitively, broke. In the silence that followed, Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide. My God, Eleanor, we did it. I looked at Arthur's portrait. No, Marcus, I said, a smile spreading across my face for the first time in weeks. Arthur did it. 3 months passed. The Texas winter faded, and the bluebonnets started to push up along the highways. The scribe's nook was different. It was alive. The first thing Marcus did as the new owner was not look at spreadsheets. He used the shop's small savings to build a stage in the back. He started a Friday night poetry slam. He invited local Austin authors for readings. He kept the coffee pot on, but now he charged $3 a cup, and people happily paid it. The shop was busier than it had been in a decade. It was loud, it was messy, it was wonderful, and I was still there, but I wasn't the owner anymore. I was, as Marcus put it, the chief legacy consultant, which mostly meant I got to sit in the cozy armchair Arthur had loved, drink free coffee, and recommend books to college students. It was the best job I'd ever had. I heard from David that Chloe's venture capital fund had fired her, publicly. The investors she'd brought were furious about the due diligence failure. In her world, it wasn't a sin to be cruel, it was a sin to be wrong. I also heard that Mr. Vance, the developer, had moved on. He'd found another old building on the other side of town, one without a ghost in its legal code. He only circled weakness, and the scribe's nook was no longer weak. Then, one sunny Tuesday, as I was shelving a new box of thrillers, the door opened. We hadn't fixed the bell. We'd decided we liked the quiet. It was Chloe. She looked smaller. She wasn't wearing a power suit. She was in jeans and a simple t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back. She wasn't carrying a tablet. She just stood by the door for a moment, looking at the organized chaos, the stage, the laughing students. She looked at me. I didn't say anything. She walked over to the mystery section, where a stack of books had been piled carelessly by a customer. She stood there, her hands twisting. I could see the internal calculation. The old Chloe would have called it inefficient inventory management. Instead, she just picked up a book. She looked at it. Then, she looked at the empty space on the shelf. And, slowly, she put it back where it belonged. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just started to shelve the books. I watched her for a minute. Then I walked over. "You're putting the history books in the fiction section," I said, not unkindly. She froze, her face flushing. I'm sorry. It's fine," I said. I handed her a duster. "But if you're going to help, start with the local history section. You missed a few things." She looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see a shark. I saw the little girl I used to babysit. She gave me a small, fragile nod. "Okay, Aunt Elle." As she walked away, I went back to my chair. They say keep Austin weird. I used to think that was about music and art, but I was wrong. Weird is just another word for soul. It's the part of you that doesn't fit on a spreadsheet. It's the part that knows the difference between a house and a home, between an asset and a legacy. Chloe thought she could digitize our soul. But she forgot that stories, real stories, they're bound in paper and ink. And they have teeth.